Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being in the audience and making the time. And I hope you will join me. I really would like to pause for just a minute to show our appreciation and thanks for those people who are providing important healthcare and everyone who's working so essentially so that we can keep going. And it's also a time to remember, this is Holocaust Remembrance Day. So there have been dark days in our past, and we will need to get through this as well. Today we have invited you to a session of Leadership Westchester. It's a 23 years strong signature program of Volunteer New York. And the class's 9-month curriculum is getting close to completion. And I know that's always a mixed feeling for the members. In previous years, we would have come today tightly packed into an auditorium of Bramson in White Plains, and we would be gathered together. So that's not possible, but we will try to make you feel that you're there like before. David Severance is the masterful facilitator for this program, and he's been doing this for 13 years. He's an extraordinary coach and a developmental expert, and you'll hear from him later. Melissa Schwartz is the founder of Hero Coaching, and she is actually going to be moderating today's panel. Volunteer New York, I just want those of you who may not be as familiar with us to know Volunteer New York is the one-stop resource for all things volunteering in our area. We cover Westchester as well as Rockland and Putnam. And we are always available at any point in time for anyone who wants to volunteer and make a difference. But especially right now, in relation to COVID-19, we're doing some extraordinary things. We have created an online virtual volunteer center where opportunities particularly related to the needs of nonprofits to respond to COVID can be found, and where anyone of any age and stage can go to see what they can do right now to make a difference. Some of those opportunities are virtual, and some of those can be done within safe distancing, but they're all very important. And more importantly, they have been identified by local nonprofits as a need right now. I hope you will go there and you'll see on your screen that it's volunteernewyork.org/BBC. Now, each year we also bring you some other programs. We have an annual board boot camp and board speed dating. We organize 2 really huge community-wide action days on 9/11 and MLK Day to bring the community together. We have special programs to engage people who are 55 years and older, and we have programs where we go into schools to make presentations. We even have an app that teens and families can use to find age-appropriate ways to support. We work with businesses who really understand the value of getting their employees engaged. Listen, there's so much to be done. And we know that every single nonprofit in Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam, including Volunteer New York, needs leadership to help their nonprofits grow. So, in addition to the strong support of SL Green, we also would like to thank certainly the participants themselves and their tuition that covers this, as well as M&T Bank and the Westchester Library System. Thank you for your support. Now, this year's panel brings together really strong voices from a variety of sectors, as it always does. You've received their bios in advance so that we could spend most of the time with a conversation with them. And the bios can also be downloaded, you'll see on your screen, and I believe that link will also be added to the chat. So you can always go back and reference the backgrounds of our panelists. I have the pleasure of introducing them now, alphabetically by last name, and then I'll turn it over to Melissa, and I'll join you in the front row. Noam Bramson is the mayor of the city of New Rochelle, and he's a member of the Leadership Westchester class of 2015. Sean Pica is the executive director of Hudson Link for Higher Education in Prison. Reverend J. Loren Russell, we call him Loren, is the founder of JLR Company, and he's also a member of the Leadership Westchester class of 2003, and he was a past board chair of Volunteer New York. And Colonel Mary Lynch Westmoreland, U.S. Army retired, rounds out our panel. I'll see you for a wrap up at the end, but right now I'll take my seat with you and take it away, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. So for the last 10 years or so, this panel has been an opportunity for Leadership Westchester to invite the public in to explore the nature and the practice of leadership. And while recently we've obviously been inundated with COVID-19 conversations and the impacts that it's had, we're really hoping to focus on this broader, as we do in Leadership Westchester. It's broader than any particular period or individual leader. Recently, Simon Sinek, a leadership expert, did a talk where he pointed out that this isn't the first time that an unusual event changed the way we live. There's been the introduction of civil rights movement, there was the introduction of the internet, of course, the attacks on September 11th, and many, many more situations. So in that vein, we're really hoping today to focus on leadership in a broader spectrum, the why of how leaders become leaders, and really how outstanding leaders hold on to their internal anchor and their why while adjusting to the ever-changing world we live in. As you heard from Elisa, we have an amazing variety of leaders, so let's get started. And I just want to remind our panelists that I am going to be watching time because we are on a time crunch to get everybody in. So if you could just try to stick to the allotted time for each question, we'd appreciate it. But let's get started with, in 3 minutes or so, can you introduce your organization and your work so we can have a better understanding of the values and mission that you have? And I'll start with Noam.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this panel. It's good to be back with David Severance. In my own Leadership Westchester experience, I was kind of the contrarian in the group, and he managed to bear that with enormous grace and wisdom. So glad to reconnect. And like everyone, I think I'm a little scared to say no to Elisa on anything. So when she asks me or anyone else to participate in a group like this, I hop to attention. So I think most people are probably familiar with what a municipal government does. In ordinary circumstances, we're responsible for day-to-day services. We think about the physical fabric and development of our community, how that will affect our future. We work with community partners to deal with social service needs. We try to be good stewards of people's investment in their homes. Obviously, the nature of our responsibilities has changed significantly in the last few weeks. It's kind of swept aside what would ordinarily be our chief priorities and given us a whole different set of assignments that have to be undertaken in the context of a radically different work environment. So the city government is sort of operating on a skeleton crew in terms of our management and our white-collar workforce, and at the same time working to maintain essential services in the field related to public safety and public works and sanitation. And of course, those city workers are themselves exposed to enhanced risk for contracting the virus. We've had several dozen of our municipal employees who have tested positive. So that's been an additional challenge for us to address as well. And the last thing I'd say is, in a crisis of this kind, people will often look to their local leadership to be sources of credible information, to speak for the community, to the external audience. And so the nature of the relationship between the municipal government and municipal leaders and the people that we represent is somewhat shifted in a climate of this kind.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's helpful to all of us. And Sean, why don't you introduce us to Hudson Link for Higher Education?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean. I'm the director of Hudson Link for Higher Education. We coordinate 5 different college programs in 5 prisons in New York State in medium and maximum security facilities. We have about 640 students, men and women, working on pre-college 2-year and 4-year programming. And recently, we just created a housing initiative that brings our reentry services now full circle. So folks that start with us in a pre-college component, work all the way through college, go through the program, then help run the program, and then upon release can come and live in our housing as well as they get our reentry services, which include monthly dinners, annual get-togethers, fundraisers, and also housing and technology support.
Thank you. Mary, how about you talk to us a little bit about your work? It's been vast, so you can tell us a little bit more about that. So, oh, you know what, Mary, let me just unmute you. Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Bottom line, I'm a volunteer. I'm one of you, but a lifelong volunteer from childhood to adulthood to retirement. And that traveled through various and varied as well as different audiences for both government as well as education, as well as the private sector, R&Ds, research and development. And I continue to do all of those to this day. So I'm coming with the perspective of coming from the other side and still alive and still engaged and still contributing. And I've given quite a bit in terms of thought as to what leadership drew out of me, as well as what I brought to leadership, coming from an introverted childhood.
I think we missed a little bit of the beginning, Mary, because we had you on mute. So I just wanted to check back and make sure we didn't miss anything. I know we started hearing when you were talking about being a lifelong volunteer, but is there anything else that we might have missed from prior to that?
I don't know where you began to hear, but I can tell you that I've covered both private sector, government, as well as volunteer work. And that started from childhood to adulthood. And I'm the beneficiary, even at the end of the last quarter of my life, at 73, to totally engage. One of the pieces to that is both in government, nonprofit, as well as the private sector, small business.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And then, of course, we have Loren. Let's make sure we have you unmuted. Tell us a little bit more about your organization, Loren.
Be happy to. And thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm really excited to have been invited, especially with these wonderful groups of people that you have with me. The JLR company is a company that I formed way back in 1992 to provide financial services to the general public. I had my own office. I was in Tarrytown, actually. But over the years, I've branched it out, and now I provide financial services to churches predominantly, working with them to help them to grow, to develop, and to do whatever they need to do, helping them to get something that's very difficult for them to get, which are church loans to build their businesses, the business part of the church. In addition to that, it's interesting because all of it really evolves around my ministry. And out of that, everything that I do essentially works around helping those who are believers to strengthen their walk, and those who are not to understand what it means to walk in faith and to walk in purpose. And so I do a radio show every week. It's now done on Facebook, but every week I've been doing it for the last 4 years. And the list goes on and on. But ultimately, and I think Ms. Westmoreland said it best, I've been a lifelong volunteer, lifelong servant, and I will continue to do so until my last and final breath is taken from me. But I like serving. I enjoy that. And it was funny, Noam said something that I had to laugh at and chuckle. He said that he was the contrarian in his class. Well, David was the contrarian in my class. And now he's the instructor. So be careful. Be very careful. You might get there yourself. So thank you. That's me.
Awesome, Loren. And why don't we continue with you a little bit more about your leadership journey and how maybe, more of the why, how you came to this leadership position that you're in right now.
Well, I've been doing this for quite a while. Thank God I'm probably a little older than I look, but I've been doing this for quite a while. I have been, again, working with in the financial services industry for a long time, started with New York Life way back when. And one of the things I've always thought was necessary was that you give back. When you receive, you give back. So I've been serving on boards since the early 90s. And got to Leadership Westchester as a result of that. But I was working then for a not-for-profit organization called Leak and Watts. They've changed their name since, but I was their director of public relations, and I was offered the opportunity to go to Leadership Westchester, and I thought it was a grand opportunity, and so I did. And at that point, I was reminded of some of the things I knew before, which were that giving is critically important in life. And so you give in so many ways. It's not just the serving on the boards. It's not just what you do, in a broader sense, but also what you do in a smaller circle, what you do with your family and friends. And so Leadership Westchester, for me, was a reminder of what it really means to be of service to people and to give them the very best that you have, because in doing that, you will also receive the very best that they have, helping them to be all that they were created to be in the first place. So for me, my Leadership Westchester journey actually began before I got there. And as a result of that, I wound up serving on the board of directors with Volunteer New York, and became the chairperson of the board. And guess who my vice chair was? Elisa Keston. And so we actually, in that process, we thought about and we intentionally implemented a succession plan. And that brought about Lisa's placement as the executive director. Who would know? But that's what happens when you give it your best. You look at what's going on, you sort of evaluate, and then you make decisions about where we should be going as a group, as a people, as a nation, as Noam, you understand, as a city leader in politics, and then you make a decision. And normally, if you're really in touch with your community, the decision will be the right one. So I'm just happy to be a part of this whole process, certainly Volunteer New York and those individuals who are now leading this effort.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like your work, service is so vital to you, not only in the work you do with Volunteer New York and as a board leader, but also in your financial service and on your radio station when you're working with clients. That service and helping others be their best and come from that place is really ingrained in what you do.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I serve I'm a Rotarian, so I serve on Yonkers Rotary. I work a lot with the New York City Police Department, doing volunteer work with them, helping them to reach out to communities and other kinds of things of that nature. The vice president with the precinct council. I just do a lot of things that that I believe helps people to be the best that they can be, whatever that is, whatever that means, and wherever it takes me.
Thank you. And Noam, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in government service and how you came to this leadership position you're in right now?
Sure. I mean, corny but true. I think, like a lot of people, it started around the dinner table as a kid. I was always taught by my parents that you should have read the newspaper that day and come prepared to talk about current events, and that you should have goals that are larger than your own self-interest. And they really approached politics and the democratic process without any sort of cynicism. They had very difficult childhoods as refugees in Europe, and they came to the United States with almost nothing. And we were always reminded about the opportunities they were able to create for my brothers and myself. And so, although I'm mindful of all the flaws and problems in our political process, which perhaps seem more intense today than ever before, I don't approach it with any cynicism. I feel really lucky to be engaged in this enterprise in which we sort of look at each other, we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we decide what it is that we owe each other as citizens and how we can advance our values in the public square. So when I was a kid, I was a clerk for New Rochelle High School Model Congress and was able to watch these older students debate issues with conviction and passion. And I thought, that's the thing for me. And so I pursued that consistently through college and graduate school. And straight out of graduate school, I began working for Congresswoman Lowy, first on our campaign staff and then as her speechwriter. And I ran for city council in New Rochelle just a few years out of graduate school back in 1995. So I've been involved in municipal government really for the bulk of my adult life, and feel really, really lucky to be in a field where I have an opportunity, as I said before, to act on my values every day. And it's a particularly special feeling to be involved in the governance of one's hometown where you grew up, and to feel like it's possible to have an impact on the future of the city.
Thank you. I'm sure our Leadership Westchester class can appreciate acting on our values. We discussed that a lot during the program. Nice to hear. Sean, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in Hudson Links and education for those who were incarcerated and moving them out afterwards?
Absolutely. My story is definitely a little unusual. I was sentenced to 24 years in prison as a teenager. When I entered the prison system, I had not yet finished high school. I was in the 9th grade when I got arrested. New York at that time was one of the only states that sentenced their 16-year-olds as adults. So when I got to the cell block for the first time, literally not envisioning how I could possibly survive the next 4 months, let alone 24 years, something unusual happened. One of the officers came to my cell and he said, hey, would you consider volunteering? And I was just so embarrassed about where I was at that point in my life. I had let everyone down, myself included, my community, my family. Had never even finished high school. And I just said to him, like, I can't even help myself. How would I possibly help anyone else? And he said, oh my God, I saw your test scores. You're one of the most educated guys around. And of course, at that point, as a teenager, not understanding the correlation between uneducated folks in prison and sentences and race. And it's just, I wish I could say that I volunteered because I knew it would help people. But selfishly, we were all in our cells 23 hours a day. And I just wanted to get out of my cell. And I volunteered just to help myself, having no idea that you can't just help yourself. And I got ushered down to a dungeon-like library in the basement of a maximum security prison where there was a pile of children's books. And I just read to the older guys, the 24-year-olds. And, you think prison is rock bottom. But when the only way you communicate with the family is by writing or receiving letters, it changes really quickly if you don't know how to read and write. And as the skinniest, nerdiest, whitest kid in the world with glasses, I started reading to these guys in this prison, a place where no one else looked like me, and changed my whole life.
And what propelled you from that experience to start working with Hudson Link and to now be the executive director? How many years have you been with that organization?
I'm the director 12 years now, but I'm not a founder. I was in the first graduating class. The older guys that I lived with, some of which were never going home, were not letting me waste my time. They were grooming me and I didn't know it. They made sure I went to school and finished my high school diploma, got involved with pre-college. I got involved with college. And in 1994, when the Pell programs were taken away all around the country, I had 118 credits and no degree. And I didn't really see it as a big deal. I mean, everything that I had heard is once you go to prison, you never really leave even after you're released. With the 68% recidivism rate, the folks that go to prison come back in the first 3 years anyway. I'm one of 5 boys. I'm the only one that went to prison, but also the only one who went to college. My mom and dad were New York City cops. They didn't go to college. So for me, I wasn't even seeing the value of education other than being able to tell my family I was doing something positive while in that place. And then when I got involved with Hudson Link, I was given the opportunity to finish my bachelor's degree and then get my MPS through New York Theological Seminary, which runs a graduate program at Sing Sing. So when I left Sing Sing, I had more time in prison than out of prison. I was 34 when I left. But I went to a halfway house right by what was then a borrowed space that acted as the Hudson Link office, where it was just board of directors, no staff, like most nonprofits. And I started volunteering because I was unemployed and just home and wanted to give back to an organization that had changed my life. And little did I know, no one else wanted the job. And all of a sudden I found myself as the director, and that was 13 years ago.
Wow. It sounds like the role of volunteering really shifted in your life.
Be careful where you volunteer.
Served you well. And Mary, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about, I know you've had a vast array of experiences, but why don't you share with us kind of your journey and how you got there, why you got there?
It started as a child. I had a wonderful father who was very, very ill, and I did not know would die a young man at 35. But I had the benefit of his commitment to the community, and consequently, and his awareness that he too is a very shy man who rose to leadership. And he saw that I, being the oldest of 5, was very shy. And a lesson he taught me very early was, no one knows you're shy unless you show it. So you just show up. And he was quite right. That was a bottom line piece to raising your hand and being there. And it was the start of a journey, truly. From that, I learned the role of leadership and that I could occupy in different stages of my life, different roles within leadership, that of a participant, a follower, a positive follower, a team leader, or the head of a group. It was a matter of picking and choosing where I best could serve. And that was a refined art for those of us who've been in leadership, know when to stand back as well as to move forward and give advice or participate more aggressively. So that brought me into a high school setting. My father died when I was a very young girl. I was 12. But I was the oldest of 5, so I had the responsibility of those kids as my mother returned to full-time work. And that thrust me into a very inadequate situation. I was not prepared to be the leader of 5 wild children at the age of 12 and keep my studies up. And we managed to do that with ebbs and flows, of course. But the fact is, I learned that the killer instinct and aggressiveness very early on didn't work for me as a style. So that I scratched as a macho solution was not going to work for me in the world, that I needed to find my niche to be able to manage large numbers of people. And in my case, it started with 5 little ones, myself included. I count myself in as a kid. But as I grew into the high school years, I remained quiet, but I did volunteer. And people saw that and appreciated just the little bits I contributed. But with each step of taking a volunteer on or being a volunteer to share the work, I learned how to share. One of the biggest things I had were mentors along the way, because my father started it. But then I can remember one person in high school who had joy when I succeeded being on time in the morning after putting the others out to school. And that gave me great confidence. That little bit. Now, when it came to actually being in leadership, in the position, there were great leaders around me. Where I found them were surprises, actually. You never know who's watching. And also, leaders are willing to reach out if you are, in fact, open to receiving guidance and information. And that's a big deal, or asking for it. So I found that in high school was the case. When I got to college, I remained in very active in student activities. As an introvert, on the swaying towards the middle in personality, I was able to recover from being engaged, but still go back and resuscitate and go back into the efforts more empowered. And so part of leadership I found, even in college, was to think about what had just happened, think about what I put into it, what went wrong, and what my part in that going wrong was. That was a big deal, and where people could help. So that brought me into being hired by that university as an admissions counselor. And from there, I moved on to future careers. But each step of the way, there was an awareness on my part that which was nurtured in me, quite frankly. It didn't come naturally to think and step back and not react quickly. Now, of course, as you get smarter and faster at what you do and your skills are there, you think quicker and things come faster. but leadership can be learned and developed, and that's where you all are. One of the things that I found was things came to me in leadership opportunities. The world opened up in terms of awareness once I was engaged. So as I was in admissions counseling, that moved on to foreign student counseling, and then that moved on to interest in government and laws and regulations. And that moved on to other things. But in all cases, I stayed within the community for my local volunteer work, as well as after work. And that brought me into associations.
You know, I think some of our participants might be surprised as you discuss your leadership style and sort of the softness or the not traditional approach, knowing that you exercise those in the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Army, which is a typically hierarchical environment. Can you touch upon how you maintained that leadership style that was your own, even in a very masculine type environment, for lack of a better term?
I'm still in that environment, interestingly enough, and I see some pictures of people I've worked with over time in that environment, both with employers in the state of New York and nationally, as well as the veterans associations, etc. But yes, well, in the early stage, when I was the most insecure, I adapted some of the trappings, exterior trappings that would make me a very serious person. Now, at the point of being embarrassed, Elisa mentioned her natural hair color. This is my natural hair color, but you would see me in a darker tone on other occasions. When I was a young woman, I found that to be important to me, that not to be discounted as a female blonde small. And so I had darker hair. I tied it back. We had options of short hair. I wore a bun, and I was stern. It was only as I developed and accomplished and found that my test of skills was passed. I knew what I was doing in terms of the basic skills of the areas I was promoting. For example, with Noam, we're talking about the knowledge in government and how to manage people. When I got to that point in the Defense Department within military areas, I was then able to find that I was also being rewarded by having successes or positive feedback from the people I worked with or for, and absolutely those I led. But one of the things that stuck out for me and today was that I began to smile. And I knew when, in confidence, I could smile in response, even in the morning's start, for no reason. So and that was that. The smile was not a sign of weakness, but it could be a sign of strength and confidence to be shared with the people in your company. That's a big deal. I'm sure in terms of leadership, you've all seen that. It starts the day for those you work with. But and in a panic situation or crisis, as you have all been leading, that is an amazing piece, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's something that you let out and you share for that moment. So that's part of what I've learned in terms of being in a masculine world, and overpowering at times for some. That is an allowance I can now enjoy, you know,
Yeah.
and share.
I love that talk about the, sometimes a smile is showing confidence and not vulnerability, but it takes some time to become comfortable with that. Thank you for sharing. Noam, let's go on to the next question. Dealing with the COVID situation has obviously become a priority for the entire world, and it's really veered us off course. So as a leader, obviously in government, and handling this unexpected challenge during this crisis, what leadership principles have you leaned on the most, and why?
So I think first and obviously to be as honest and transparent as possible. The credibility with which public officials speak is of paramount importance in a moment of crisis, and being able to acknowledge forthrightly what you know and what you don't know, and being able to put facts in some relevant context, I think is enormously important. I think second, trying to demonstrate calm and confidence, even if you don't necessarily feel it inwardly. If you are advising people to approach a situation in a fashion that is measured and proportionate to the challenge, then you better be able to exemplify that tone yourself. Otherwise, it's tough to deliver that message. And lastly, I think this is a moment when everyone in public leadership needs to speak with clarity and consistency. That's sort of up and down the line. So much of the work that we've done in New Rochelle has had to happen in concert with county authorities and state authorities. Those are the levels of government which have public health expertise and public health apparatus, which we don't have at a local level. So there may have been moments at which a local or county or state official may have disagreed on what the optimum path forward might be. And yet I think it's better in a context like this to be united publicly around a mediocre plan than it is to be squabbling publicly about a better plan. And so being able to manage that tension, work things out in a private way, and have a united, clear front in a public way, I think has been enormously important. And it's one of the lessons that's been driven home to me as a result of this COVID-19 experience.
And would you be willing to share some of kind of the internal work you do during this, or support and resources that you have to help support you in doing this and coming out confident, and even in maybe not fully sure of the plans you're sharing or the information you're sharing?
Well, so first, we've been very fortunate to have an outstanding relationship with County Executive Latimer and with his team, with our state legislative delegation. You know, those relationships are important even in the normal course of operation, but in a crisis situation where many things cannot be anticipated and where there needs to be a quality of trust between people in leadership positions, being able to rely on pre-existing relationships that are strong is critical. Internally, you know, the folks that I've had to deal with on a most regular basis, in addition to our city manager, who I deal with even in the normal course of events, our director of marketing and communications, Kathy Gilwitt, has been a real star. You know, remember, New Rochelle was in the glare of the we're accustomed to, and it added a whole level of complication to what would ordinarily be a great challenge as well. So having someone who understands how to navigate the media landscape and be able to provide some guidance and support has been vital. And I'll give a shout out, well-deserved, to Julie Convisser, who is part of the Volunteer New York team, who we brought on board as our Director of Community Engagement. She's helping to identify social service needs and gaps, helping to mobilize resources that we can direct where they are needed in this new crisis environment. And being able to work hand in glove with Julie has been wonderful. And lastly, our business ambassador, Lisa Davis, who has relationships with lots of entrepreneurs in New Rochelle who are undergoing you know, enormous pressures right now, and being able to work with them through Lisa in order to support them has been really, it's been a rewarding experience and a difficult experience at the same time.
Mm-hmm. We're big fans of Julie here, so we love the shout out of Julie. But it also sounds like one of the principles that's been guiding you is having a strong team around you, and building that network even before this even happened has served you well, and provided the support that you needed and that New Rochelle needed, and obviously the whole state actually looking at you guys as an example through this. It's been terrific. Loren, can you talk a little bit about your work and you know, the unexpected situations that you've gone through with COVID, and what leadership principles have guided you at this time in supporting your church clients, but also when you're doing your radio talk show? Unmute you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. This has been one of the most challenging of times for a number of reasons. We can't go and physically be with people. be not just that, but we're experiencing some types of stress and anxiety that we've never experienced before. Oftentimes, when a person, goes to the hospital, we can go with them, we can visit with them, we can share with them. But now, oftentimes, when someone is taken to the hospital, it's almost like a goodbye. That's it. We won't see them anymore, which rises to another level of anxiety. In my world, in the last 3 weeks, I either know or know persons who've lost family members or friends that total right now about 31 people, which is absolutely incredible. I've done homegoing services, virtual ones. I have actually gone to the cemeteries and done the interment, and I was the only one at the cemetery. This is an unprecedented time. The funeral directors are overwhelmed, can't even put bodies into their facilities. And my cousin passed away last week. His funeral is going to be May the 9th because we can't get closer to that date because of the backlog of people that they're having to deal with. And so a lot of my days have been spent counseling with people, helping them to get through this very traumatic time and understanding that that this too shall pass. It's difficult. And, just last week we celebrated Resurrection Sunday. I'm a Christian, I'm a Baptist preacher. And so I've been using it as a backdrop to tell people that, look, it was Good Friday. It was not a good day, but Resurrection Sunday came and Jesus got up from the grave. And so consequently, I'm saying to you that we will get through this, but we have Good Fridays to live through. And this just happens to be a long Good Friday. It's midnight and it's going to be midnight for a while. So my radio show, which comes on every Monday night, again, I do it on Facebook under my name and under Matters of Faith. Matters of Faith is a column that I write in the Bronx Chronicle. It is the radio show that I produce now on Facebook. It is also the book that I've written, Matters of Faith. And it was all designed long before this came around to help people, to encourage them to be the best that they can be and to be able to take scripture and put it into your everyday life. Because if you can't put the things that you believe in your life, then what good is the things that you believe in? And so that's what the show has been about. That's what my writing has been about. If you care to go to thebronxchronicle.com. I'm a Bronxite, by the way, guys. I do a lot in Westchester, but I live in the Bronx. And so I want to make sure that I give back to my community. I've done a lot of things and continue to do a lot of things in Westchester and other places, but you got to bloom where you're planted. This is my home, and I want to make sure that I'm here doing what's necessary for the people in my community. And so, that's what's happening. But I've been doing that anyway. I've been doing the radio show and the writing and all of those things for the last 4 years. I'm not new to this, but now because we're confined and we're self-isolating, however you want to call it, whatever, quarantining, whatever you want to call that. So now it's even more important to outreach, to reach out and to touch people without physically putting your hands on them. And they need to feel you. A few years ago, there was a common vernacular among young people, and they would always say, "You feel me? You feel me?" And they didn't mean touching you. I see Spike. He's nodding his head because that's true, right? If you can feel me, then that means we've connected. You don't have to physically be with someone in order to connect, but you have to emotionally connect with them, spiritually connect with them, mentally connect with them, and then you have relationship, and that can help people more than anything that you've ever seen, more than anything you could ever imagine. We need to be doing more of that. I'm doing as much as I personally can to reach out to those that I know in every area that I can. So in my seat here at my office in my home, which is where I work anyway, so this is not new to me because I'm always at home, but this is where I want to begin to expand and to blossom and to bloom so that the tree that's planted in my yard is actually feeding people wherever they may be. And so my position right now is to challenge everybody to become more engaged in your leadership, in your volunteerism, and more in your compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the compassion that we need that really helps us to relate to other people. My fellow colleague said something because he was incarcerated, that He was the only person in his environment that looked like him, that talked like him, and felt sort of like, you know, he was by himself. But you know what? When people connect on a human level, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. And then you can begin to develop that part of your relationship, and the compassion is what helps you to do that. So so my leadership has just expanded. It's just going in every direction, working with the churches, helping them to get through, because many times, you know, people, none of us have experienced this before, but those of us who have gone through Leadership Westchester and have learned various techniques that we can put into action. Most of all, as you all know, those of you who actually went to, those of you who are thinking about it, think no longer, get involved. Because what it does is it's not an exterior look at leadership. It's an interior look at leadership. Who are you? Where does your leadership skills come from? It goes into the inside. And once you get it, once you understand what it is on the inside, you can bring it to the outside. Yeah. But if you don't know what you've got, you can't give it to anybody. You can't share it with anybody. So bring it out, and let's see if we can make a difference today. Okay, so I'm sorry, I had to do a commercial, but that's true.
Well, thank you. We appreciate all the promotion. We're very sorry for your loss also, not only of your cousin, but of your community members. And it sounds like you've really been a pillar of support for so many. And, you know, I hear you talking, and I hear gratitude and hope coming up as just key factors in what you're sharing and helping people live their principles every day through this difficult time.
Can I add one thing before we go to the next person? Mm-hmm. On my radio show 3 weeks ago, I had my doctor on, and I had my cousin who's a holistic practitioner to talk about how do you build up your immune system during this time. 2 weeks ago, I had a psychologist who used to be my psychologist, Dr. Craig Polite, and we talked about how do you maintain your sanity in this environment. Last week, we talked about the resurrection and keep your focus, you know, keep your eyes open. And last night, I had 4 nurses on the show, 4 nurses that talked about nursing and what you need to do from different perspectives. One was an oncology nurse. One worked in a nursing home. One works with people who have been federal workers who are out on workman's comp and oftentimes couldn't even get back to work and went into homelessness. And the other was a nurse that had a stroke 24 years ago and can't do her work anymore, but still has a heart and a compassion of nursing. So it was really, and so I'm trying to structure those broadcasts to help people to apply their faith in their life wherever they may be. It doesn't matter where you are, just bloom where you're planted.
Very nice, thank you. Sean, can I have you tell us a little bit about, you know, obviously we spoke before this talk about how COVID-19 is impacting the prisons and of course their program around education. What principles and leadership principles have been guiding you, and talk a little bit about that for us, please.
Yes, thank you. I think as a client that went through the program and is now the director of the organization, I have always tried to focus specifically on the students' needs. I've always, even after I became the director, visited all the facilities, met with the students, talked with the site coordinators that manage those sites, engaged with the board members. It is a tremendous amount of effort to do all of that outreach and your job at the same time, but I just always felt that that was really the leading component of staying connected with the organization. Right now, nothing has changed, because even though the professors aren't getting into the facilities and the staff of the facilities aren't there, it's only the officers coming and going, it has been a bigger job than ever to stay connected with our students and our staff. And I remember I was at the facility during 9/11, and I remember like it was yesterday, this feeling of completely being isolated while the rest of the world was dealing with this huge attack. We were just completely left out of it. And I want to make sure that our students in the 5 facilities do not feel like they're not a part of what's happening right now. We're doing letter writing campaigns. I'm personally doing letters back and forth with the students. I'm connecting with the facilities. Those officers feel completely isolated as well. It's been a really tough time, but I think as a team, our 17 staff members and our 20 board members have done an amazing job of keeping connected with our students.
Right. So communication is absolutely key to keeping involved. I know you spoke about having a relationship with a warden who could pass along information to one of the inmates to make sure that their work was staying constant in support of that whole community. It's more than just one person. It reminds me of Noam talking a little bit about.
When we talk about the Department of Corrections, it's always as an adversary. And right now, during these efforts, between our housing initiative, where we're working with students that are still being released during this pandemic. So we're working directly with the Division of Parole and daily with the Department of Corrections. And while we're always looking at them as adversaries, they are partners in a way that could never even be described to allow us to continue this work during the worst crisis we've ever seen.
Yeah, so important. Mary, how about you go ahead and tell us about the leadership principles that have been guiding you right now, and kind of keeping the momentum going with your work and how COVID's impacting it.
Mostly, I reiterate, as they were bringing up the outreach piece, one at a time, not just in groups or mass emails or mass videos, but one at a time, reaching out. One of the biggest pieces and that enhances life right now is not just the letter, but return to a letter, people. Write something, take a note, but also the other piece, the enhancements of video, televideo, for those who are able to do that. I've noticed dramatic differences in terms of team play and interaction just by looking at each other. So there is a tremendous advantage we have than we've had in the past to deal with this very horrible period. But it is pressure filled. And one of the things you mentioned and our your other leaders on the panel have mentioned, but it is true. We do need to step back and present a sense of calm and confidence. Yes, when nobody knows the outcome, but in terms of planning the future, we have to actually keep our heads in the future right now, as well as the present, the outcomes and how we'll deal with that. And what maybe new programs we've come up with, because one of the things that we've discovered as leaders today is that there are so many more ways, the old expression, many ways to skin a cat, horrible expression, but it applies here. The variations on the norm have actually become a norm for us in this period. And it's wonderful to open people's minds to different ways to reach out to each other. Continuing that, how are we going to do that in the future? And it may be far, far away, or it may be near, but it's the fact that we have more tracks to play, to ride. And that's a big plus in the way we live as a mature society. So in direct application, when I work with employers now, and one of the more current activities, I work with employers who have mobilized Reserve and National Guard members and families, because they all become responsible for the families that work to support their mobilized sailor, Army or Air Force person, Navy. One of the major pieces to that is assuring them they'll be coming back, assuring them that there will be process to step them back. But with that process is time, and we try to remind people. So the calmness of understanding there is a process in place. It may be tweaked, it may be changed, but flexibility is one of the things we're trying to nurture in terms of mental responses and understanding of what's going on right now. In the case of the families, that is a whole new challenge, because they are not only isolated from their own community in the current state of living within your home and within a narrow scope, but also from your spouse, totally. And that adds to the double isolation that some of these children are experiencing when they face and see on television uniforms, military, police. It applies to the police, it applies to the physicians, it applies to the nurses, it applies certainly to the service deliverers. that they're in harm's way every day, watching television and listening, or watching a video about it. So that's another piece that we work in terms of intervening with the families to put it in the context and to limit the exposure. And also, children act out, we have to work with that. So we do that one-on-one, and we prompt the parents. So that's another piece to what I'm doing right now. In the case of volunteer organizations locally in Westchester, because that is mostly all over the state of New York, as well as prominently right now in New Rochelle and Manhattan, New York City, all over. But the other piece to it would be local volunteer work. One of the things I found as president of one locally and two smaller organizations, national but local chapter organizations, the idea that things are dead right now, and that's not a fact at all. And the understanding and nurturing of the idea that we have, as Loren brought up, there's a world ahead of us, and keep moving. There's a part to be played right now that brings that life back in whole or in part. And many of us at this session are already doing that. And you know this naturally, but it didn't come naturally to some, and you have to nurture that. And that's where the leadership piece comes in, inspiring them and exciting them. And your own confidence that, well, all right, I don't know how to do this right now. As Lisa once called me and said, I'm not quite sure how we'll do this panel because it was so early. You hadn't done Zoom very often. And but we'll get it done. Well, yeah, we'll figure it out. There are much brighter people in the world, and let's tap them to do that. That's a piece of leadership that I reminded every day today is still a piece, knowing your own limitations and where can I tap that talent, you know. So that's much of the time I find I'm actually connecting others to what they need to have. While it may not meet my needs immediately, it will to Harry or Joe's or Betty's, you know, needs to get a job done and to share with others. So that's part of what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. So I heard a couple of things in there. I mean, obviously flexibility is being key, but certainly tapping into that emotional intelligence and really connecting with people and listening deeper than their words to understand how they're feeling, to address the emotions that are going on. Clearly, some people are feeling like everything's shut down and it's dead and we can't move forward, but helping to motivate them. And I think it segues nicely. I want to open it up to the group for some questions. And I see Tara asked an excellent question of, you know, obviously we put on our superhero capes and we're leaders and we all show up and we want to motivate those around us, but underneath that we're still human and we're still dealing with this very serious issue. So if you can all tell us a little bit about the self-care you're taking to make sure that you're maintaining yourself and you're caring for yourself and you're able to show up for others. And Mary, you can start if you're comfortable with that.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Say that again.
So more of, you know, what, obviously this is a difficult time and you're showing up for others to make sure they're feeling empowered. But when you take off that day, you know, you take off your makeup and you put on your comfortable clothes and your sweatpants that we're all wearing underneath our nice tops here, you know, how are you caring for yourself and dealing with this all? It's all new for us. We're all going through kind of the pain and the uncertainty. And so what are you doing to make sure that you're cared for and that you're supported?
Well, I have the benefit of the value of contemplation. I do step back and I do think about what transpired that day. That's a comfort, because it's reviewed, it's assessed, and I can put it to the side because I've planned my next day. Whether it changes or not is another story, but I do plan that next day. But in terms of the comfort zone, there's obviously no escape easily. aside from what I enjoy, which is the reading and the, just sit down and relax. One of the piece to it is, though, I like to write, and I do put together different poems it gets a great deal of satisfaction. It gives it for me. Terrible poems. Will not share, but they're very satisfactory for me. And the other piece to it is just focusing on my family. And that's a big deal. Being able to shift gears and just see on Zoom my grandchild, or who's not happy today, but it doesn't matter. And the other piece to that is also thinking, and this is a big thing for me, is to just remember how in bits and pieces over life, we've all been prepared for this day. And they may not have been, it absolutely wasn't as intense and horrific as it is today. But certainly I was thinking, some of us in this room, I see Josh is in the audience, we've been in combat more than once. And it's for lengths of time. And people die next to you. And you don't get to say goodbye. You don't get to bury them. If you're in a hospital today, just like in a combat hospital yesterday, or in Landstuhl, Germany's central hospital for retrograde, when you're bringing back the seriously wounded from the battlefield of the United States' efforts, you may be just the supply guy called down on all hands to help remove people from that plane and roll them into the hospital off the tarmac. And you know that you're the only one holding their hand, and that may be your last moment. And even supply sergeants go back to their desk and continue their work. The challenge is, how do you wrap your head around that, doing it months and months in advance, over and over again, which did happen for our people, for our soldiers and sailors. So we have had mental preparations, and there are impacts. And how do we deal with those impacts afterwards? How do we resolve what we've learned and apply it to the future and benefit from it, rather than let it be our worst memory ever? So that's, when you say comfort, I actually think about these things and others must also, because we've been in these challenges, we've been on the battlefield, or we've been in the city during 9/11.
Sure.
Just for that one day or those 3 days where you didn't know the outcome either. And so we've been prepared. It's whether we've managed that preparedness to benefit us today. And that's it looks like so many have been able to do that, moving on.
It's terrific, learning from our past and understanding what lessons we have. But I also love how you shared the poetry. Obviously, a lot of people journal, and just that type of reflection is helpful in taking some time and just reflecting on the situation and what's going on and what's happened previously to help us through the current situation.
May I mention, you just brought up the journal. Yes, I early on in my officer career, as well as in my leadership training with IBM way back in college, we were trained to keep a journal. And I have volumes of journals. Now, the negative to that is, if you get into contract management like I did, and the court wants to look at your journal for pre-decision, you have to mark out all the personal comments you made in it. But the reality is, yes, a journal is invaluable.
Terrific. And Sean, I'm going to go to you on this question again, because I know, for many years, the 13 years you've been the executive director at Hudson Link, you've dealt with many difficult situations. How do you now, and previously, have you maintained your personal care, and what do you do to practice that?
I mean, I feel super spoiled right now. I'm in a 5,000 square foot home with a bunch of family and a lot of toilet paper and a backyard. And I really feel like I'm not feeling it like some of my staff members that are in a, one bedroom apartment with 4 kids. They're feeling this in a very different way, as is folks that are living alone. So I feel super spoiled, but I also have a very different perspective. I served 16 of my 24 years in 9 different maximum security prisons. I've been in and out of riots, in and out of solitary confinement. I lived in the largest cell block in the country. I don't feel isolated right now, and I actually feel really blessed. So I'm using this time right now to be as supportive as possible for my staff and my team and my family that don't feel the same way that I do and are feeling challenged. And I'm using my time to just be supportive of them.
Nice. And so it sounds like gratitude is key to you feeling good. You're thankful for your toilet paper that we're all thankful for, but the small things really go a long way. And just more broader, some of the questions I'm reading through for the panel, maybe Noam, you can talk about this, you touched base on it previously, but can you talk about how in your work, uniting public allies helps to elevate the results in the responses you see?
Oh, look, I mean, I think it's essential. This is a time when it has to be all hands on deck. And there's no one individual or one institution which is capable of grasping the enormity of this problem by itself. So partnerships, which even in the normal course of events are important, become even more vital when you're facing a crisis of this kind. You think, for example, about food distribution for folks who are insecure. We're lucky to have social service providers in New Rochelle who do that day in and day out. The needs are exponentially greater right now. And so being able to work in partnership with our school district, with regional entities like Feeding Westchester, being able to launch innovative programs like one we have in New Rochelle that provides gift cards and gift certificates from restaurants to needy individuals who have been identified by community agencies. That kind of web of relationships is really important in being able to meet the challenge. And then even from a strictly public health perspective, when we talk about establishing testing centers, when we talk about disseminating information about public health practices, social distancing requirements, thinking about the way in which those messages have to be cast to different constituencies who may receive information in different ways, may have language barriers, may have trust issues with folks in positions of authority. Being able to mobilize all those different strands in a way that is that's harmonized, so that people are working in concert and not at cross purposes, is vitally important. And we don't always get it right. I think we should acknowledge honestly that we're sort of learning on the fly. And one of the things that's been brought home to me through the last few weeks is the degree to which we all need to approach this with a degree of humility. Knowing that what we are able to perceive today, what seems like wisdom today, may prove otherwise in a very short period of time. But if we work together, if we really listen to each other, if we are respectful of different people's expertise and experience and try to build on that, then I think that constructs a pathway to a better future.
Awesome. And I think, one of the other questions ties nicely into what you're saying, and pulling together all of these people. One of the questions is maintaining and rebuilding our culture through this difficult time. So I don't know if Loren or one of the other panelists want to discuss how we maintain the culture of our organizations through transition, but also in pulling in all these different stakeholders who might have different ideas of what that looks like.
Well, the idea of cultures, for me, the idea that we're in a cultural melting pot in the United States is very real to me, and that this pandemic has kind of brought that to the surface, that we're all in this together. There are no big I's and little U's. It's just us, and we have to work together in order to get through this pandemic. We really do. The differences that we have, we'll find out that we have more in common than we do difference. And so if we work together, if we really sort of engage and bring to the table what we have to offer, I believe that we'll be able to defeat this terrible disease. this virus. And not just that, but we'll bridge gaps that have separated us as a community and in cultures for such a long period of time. Not everything in our experience in our lives have sort of, bring up. 9/11 was one thing that brought us together. I've never seen such unity in any community as I did when 9/11 took place. It didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter your social economic background. It didn't matter what language you spoke. We were all in this together in New York. Well, the pandemic is kind of like that. And I think what Noam said is correct. We have to look at and approach this thing with a bit of humility. Nobody knows what's going to come next. No one knows. And if we take it with a grain of humility, I think we'll be able to get through it. But not just that, but I think we'll be able to pull ourselves together. And I say that in light of that other question that you asked about self-management. How do you maintain your equilibrium, your focus, and your balance during such difficult times? And there are a few things, and some of which I discussed with the psychologist who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, but we are in agreement. A, don't watch too much TV because it'll drive you crazy. There's so much information out there that it can actually clog your mind. Structure is important because now we're quarantined, we're self-isolating, we're in our homes together. And what we need to do is make sure that we have structure in our lives so that we're getting the right amount of sleep. So we're not going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 12 o'clock, and your patterns are all destroyed. Set a time frame, work through that. Positive things, David sends out, and I love this, David sends out little quotes every other day or so that really are inspirational, gives me something to think about. I bridge that with the Bible and other kind of religious things because there's a whole lot of motivation in scripture. Physical activity, exercise. I do exercises every day. I have a little Stairmaster that I use. I do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 miles a day, plus my little weightlifting and sit-ups. And I kind of keep myself active because I don't want to atrophy. I don't want to lose my physical ability while I'm trying to battle with this wickedness, this virus that's out there. Regular sleep, I think I mentioned that. And eating, trying to eat the right things. So, my doctor said something that was interesting, and I don't mind. I know she won't mind if I quote her. She says, don't bring the devil into your house, because if you bring him into your house, you'll put him in your mouth. So make sure that you're eating right. So those are the things that I'm personally practicing so that I can be of comfort to others who are outside who may not have it as good as I do. The 5,000 square feet, the backyard, and all of those kinds of things. But other people are struggling. They're in their homes. The kids are driving them crazy. They didn't like their spouse to begin with. Now they hate them. And so all of those kinds of things. So if I'm good, I can help somebody else. But if I'm not doing well, don't call me because I don't want to talk to you because I'm trying to deal with my own stuff. So that's what I wanted to say. So the cultural piece, I think it starts at home. Leadership, as I said, is an inward transformation that shows up on the outside, and we're being squeezed right now. So in our being squeezed, what comes out of us is what's in us.
Terrific. Thank you for those reminders. Really helpful. It reminds me or helps me the 50% off Easter candy that's sitting downstairs should be removed from my house. But of course, the working out and keeping a schedule, such good things for us to keep doing, and we can't help others if we're not taking care of ourselves. I want to thank you all so much. I really appreciated it. And I'm going to pass this off to David, who's going to do a little bit of a wrap up for us all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome again. My name is David Severance. I'm the facilitator of Leadership Westchester. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here. All of us who are in the program are delighted to share just a glimpse of it with you. For those of you who are coming back either as alums or Friends of Volunteer New York or people who are just interested in leadership and have been here in the past, welcome back. We hope you find something in these conversations that you can take with you of value. We're going to just spend the last 10 minutes or so doing something that's an important part of the leadership program, and that's reflecting on what we're experiencing. One thing that I think is really special about the Leadership Westchester program is it's a 9-month program. Most programs on leadership out there are maybe half a day, maybe a 2-day boot camp. And while those things can certainly be helpful, leadership is not something that can be mastered in a short period of time. Like other types of things like getting healthy or becoming a really great piano player or golfer, it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort over time to get someplace. We've heard from our panelists this morning about this crucial kind of inner or personal element of leadership. And that requires a lot of reflection and contemplation. So the program itself is set up to allow you a tremendous amount of time to think about who you are, what you want, why you want it, and how you can get it for yourself and for those around you. A lot of people have talked this morning about volunteering. From my point of view, there's a common or important premise in our program that leadership is about contribution. And so I see volunteering as a form of leadership. There's another premise in our program that leadership is not about positional authority. That is, we have this reflexive idea that if you have a position of authority, then you're a leader. And we commonly refer to people who have positional authority as leaders. But if you think about it a little bit, not everyone who has great positional authority is automatically leading effectively. And the converse is also true. There are all kinds of people out there who don't have great positional authority who are leading in incredible ways. And if we look at historical figures like Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King, we see people like that coming out of the masses who ended up creating incredible contributions for their communities or the world. And they did it without positional authority. And so we hope that everyone feels empowered to lead in their own particular way. And that requires a journey inside to understand who you are, what you want for yourself and others, why you might want it, and how you can get it. So we spend a lot of time in the program having discussions with each other. I throw out a lot of questions to everyone, and we kind of share our thinking with each other, and there's a lot of cross-pollination. What I'd like to do in the last 10 minutes or so is kind of give you an experience of that. I'd like whoever the tech person is to turn off everyone's mic so that everyone can speak here if they choose. If you're in a noisy spot, please mute yourself. You'll be able to do that, if you can't already, by clicking on the participant icon at the bottom of your screen. That will open up a small box that lists all of the participants on the call, and you'll see a little microphone icon next to your name on that list. So you'll also see a button there that says raise hand. So I'd like to ask a few people in the audience to contribute now. Simply, what did you hear from one of the panelists that resonated with you, and why? And so if you'd like to answer that question, please click the raise your hand button and make sure your mic is turned on. And then I'll call on you when I see your hand raised. And I'd like to hear a brief, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, just so we can hear from a bunch of people and not just one or two. So the question is, what have you heard that's resonated for you so far this morning, and why? Let's go to Kenneth Levy or Levy. I see your hand raised. Kenneth?
Hi, it's Levy.
Levy, thank you.
What Pastor Loren mentioned when he was talking about that you should what's part of you should be part of your leadership, and that relates to your core beliefs. Your core beliefs as a person, your core beliefs as an educator, your core beliefs as a politician. So that resonated very strongly to me. And when Mayor Bramson mentioned listening as part of leadership, way too often people don't listen. And I think about even the recent Democratic debates, that they weren't role modeling being leaders because they weren't listening to one another. And so when Mayor Bramson mentioned listening, that really resonated with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your insight today.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. We do spend a lot of time in the program focusing on our personal beliefs and our listening, so thank you for bringing both of those up. All right, next I'd like to hear from Mary Jo Jacobs. Please unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Well, first, thank you so much to all four speakers. It was just very inspirational, wonderful, great timing. So thanks to the Volunteer New York group for putting it together. Two things I just wanted to specifically point out. One is being in Rochelle and managing against this virus early in, it has been an absolute lesson in leadership, watching Noam, the way he speaks on social, on media, on in media, on TV with news reporters, etc. It's always very professional, very grounded, very empathetic. So I learn from him all the time, and he knows that. I'm a huge, huge fan. And also, I really appreciated Sean's kind of his experience and how that reframes his role in the virus today, given his past experiences. I found it moving, actually. Brought a tear to my eye, but very beautifully stated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jo. It may be easy for many people to recognize how Sean's journey has brought him where he is today. And this idea about understanding who you are, what matters to you, how you can kind of bring that out from the inside, as Loren was alluding to before, is pretty clear in Sean's story as well as the others. Thank you. Let's hear from Jan Albanese, please. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, so there was so much that I am taking away from this, but one thing in particular, Mary said about contemplation. Every night she thinks about what she's accomplished during the day, thinks about what she's going to do tomorrow, and I think that would be tremendously helpful for me to take away, to give me something to start with the next day, because it's been hard. So thank you to all of you for everything you did.
Thank you. Let's hear from Ginny Laughlin. Please unmute yourself.
I was really taken by the panelists' commonality around gratitude for community, gratitude for colleagues, gratitude for allies, as well as adversaries. So as a common thread, I really found that incredibly moving. And Colonel Westmoreland, particularly that idea that we all have ways in which we've prepared for this moment was really had a lot of impact on me, to think about, not thinking about where we are in terms of deficits, but where we can draw from strength in our past experience to face this time. So thank you.
Thank you. One of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about over the course of the program is what kind of a mindset empowers us as individuals, whatever the situation is, not in a crisis moment, but at all times. We can choose to lead ourselves from a place of gratitude. We can choose to lead ourselves from a place of compassion, like Loren was suggesting. Or we can choose to lead ourselves from fear. There are many different places we can lead ourselves from. And when you see what comes out on the outside, you get some kind of a glimpse as to what might be going on in the mindset of the individuals. And my personal perspective is that when we're leading ourselves from fear, we're giving up all of our power as leaders. And so part of our work as leaders is to think about how we can lead ourselves from something other than fear, especially in a crisis time, but in general anyway. If what matters to us are values or beliefs around gratitude or service or compassion, some words that have come out this morning, those are ways that we can empower ourselves at every moment. Let's hear from Enrico Rodriguez, please. Enrico, please. Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I want to thank the speakers. Very touching, very moving. Thank you for inspiring me. What really resonated was, Loren talking about giving back. And an example of that would be as simple as being the best of what you have for family and friends. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. At any time, whether it's crisis or not, the world needs what we have to offer. And being at our best is what we have to offer. And so even if we're not at our best at every moment, and that's perfectly okay, part of leadership is about giving what we have to give. Thank you, Enrico. And finally, let's hear from Leonard. I don't see a last name on there. Leonard?
Yes, how you doing, David? And first and foremost, Melissa, and Volunteer New York, all the panelists, thank you all for this great opportunity. I'm Leonard Abbott of One Change at a Time. Our organization is an intergenerational organization that's been serving New Rochelle for over 5 years now, and doing volunteer work in long-term care facilities such as the Dumont Center and Montefiore Schaefer Extended Care. What I gained from this, being a leader of a nonprofit organization, from all the panelists, it really seems like what correlated was volunteering and giving back. And in everyone's role and responsibility that they currently have now, volunteering and giving back, and not just thinking about themselves, but thinking about other people. That really resonated with me when Miss Westmoreland spoke about the smile and how that provided strength and confidence. That was a big takeaway, because sometimes, when you're kind of like in the heat of the moment, it's like you can't show any smile or any sort of gratitude, so to speak. But that doesn't, as she stated, mean a sense of weakness. That's a sense of strength and confidence. So I like that. And then Mayor Bramson spoke about transparency and living it and being consistent. Those three things, that he mentioned. And then leadership, being transparent, but living what you expect other people to follow by, and being consistent in your message is very important. So that's what I took away from it.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who added a comment to our conversation here. I hope that this brief glimpse into the program has been of value to you. If you find value in thoughtful discussion like this, clarification of who you are and what you want to contribute to the world, and discussion on how you can do that, I'd urge you to consider joining the Leadership Westchester program this coming year or in a future year. It's a unique experience. Talk to anyone who's been through it. Many of them will say it's changed their lives ever since. And we're always looking for great people to join the program. There's no particular type of profile of person who fits or doesn't fit this program. So if you want more out of your life, if you want to get more and give more, consider joining the program. And now I'll turn it back to Elisa Keston, who started us off.
So thank you, David. I want to thank David, of course, for leading this program with such integrity year after year. I want to thank Melissa Schwartz, who's new to the program. This was her first year moderating. I hope it will not be your last. I think you did a beautiful job, and thank you so much for rising to the occasion and showing your leadership. And I'd also, of course, like to thank all the panelists. I found, as a participant in the front row, having been at these panels year after year, this felt more intimate in some ways than previous ones. And I hope to some extent each of you felt the same way. I'm going to close us out with 3 important announcements. One is that June 22nd is going to be graduation for Leadership Westchester, and it's always an opportunity for everyone in the community to join, whether we do it virtually, where we can have many more people join us than ever before, or some combination of in-person, is to be determined. But June 22nd, please mark your calendars. The other thing is, as of today, the application process is now open for Leadership Westchester. And David is right, there is no particular profile, but I will tell you that we only accept 20 people each year. So my point is to please think thoughtfully. The information is on our website. It tells you the dates. You must be able to participate fully in all of the sessions, as well as more information and the application. So take a look at our website for that. And then finally, volunteerism was one of the themes we heard. Please remember that Volunteer New York is here for you. Go to the Virtual Volunteer Center or our general online bank of opportunities. And we are an organization here for you. So you can call us as well at 948-4452. Be well, everyone. And thank you all for being in the front row today for this panel. Have a great day and be safe. Wash your hands.